Hey guys, it's Christian from Lost in Discovery, and today we are going to be looking at Gavilar's feast. What happened that night? What was Gavilar up to? There were so many different plans and key events at play, and today we're going to piece them all together, find different bits of information to finally try and understand what happened that night. Now, in doing research for this video, I found many cool Easter eggs, tidbits, and secrets that were happening during the scene, and I think you'll get great enjoyment following along with me and trying to piece it all together. Now, a spoiler warning for this video. This video requires you to be up to date with the Stormlight archive. It talks about events from the Way of Kings all the way through, even to the end of Rhythm of War. Now, I'll let you know that I'm not going to spoil any events, characters, or things like that from other Cosmere stories. We're going to keep this Stormlight archive focused. I might allude that people are from different planets, but I'm not going to give any more information than that. Alright, now before we get stuck into all the nitty-gritty details, I'll just set the scene for you. The Alethi are having a peace treaty with the Parshendi. They've decided to be peaceful and work together, and this feast is to celebrate and commemorate that. This is taking place in Kholin, the Alethi royal seat. Gavilar is king. He's having secret meetings in the background, talking to some very important figures, including heralds. Basically, anyone who is anyone is at this feast, especially in Alethi culture, and from the Parshendi side, the Council of the Five, which are like the elders of the Parshendi, are there also. Alright, with that said, let's get stuck into it. Let's see what secrets we can find. This amazing scene that basically kicks off the entire story. Okay, now before we talk about any of the prologue chapters, I want to talk about a Venli chapter that we got in Rhythm of War. Now, Venli was at this feast as well, and she was there a few hours before it properly began, and there's a lot of information in this chapter that tells us a lot about why Gavilar was killed. So Venli is sneaking through the Kholin palace with Ulim, and Ulim is her voidspren. The way she got Ulim was from a woman named Axindweth. Axindweth seems to be from another world in the Cosmere, and she was working for Gavilar. You remember in Venli's flashbacks that Axindweth gave her the gemstone that actually had Ulim in it. She is the woman who actually gave the Parshendi a voidspren in the first place, so she's up to something massive. So what she's presumed to do is left more gemstones with probably more voidspren, and that's what Ulim and Venli are trying to get. As they sneak through the palace, they find that the whole stash is gone, and she has left an encoded message. Ulim uncodes the message and basically says that Axindweth has been found out and she is gone. Ulim basically says she has gone back to whatever planet she is from. Ulim says that another one of her kind has betrayed her and turned Gavilar against her. Ulim starts to panic, and he starts to panic even more because he starts to realize heralds are at this feast as well. This is what he says to Venli. "You have no idea how royally, colossally, incredibly ruined we are. I saw Shalash first and followed her, then ran across not only Kalak, but Nale." Reading this was mind-blowing to me because even though I knew there were heralds at the feast, they are mentioned by name here for some of the first times ever, and we know that Ulim actually knew these heralds. So not only is Ulim a voidspren, but he's actually been around for just as long as the heralds and knows them well enough to know them by name. Let's see what happens next with Venli in this scene. Ulim checks out and Venli gets captured by the Alethi guards. She gets taken in, and soon Nale discovers her and takes her into his own custody. Nale recognizes Ulim, and even though Venli's quite lost, we the reader can gather that they have a history together. Nale is super confused how a voidspren is able to be on Roshar. Voidspren and fused and people like this aren't able to get to the planet of Roshar unless the heralds break, and at this point Talon is still holding on to the Oath Pact and getting tortured. So he's like, how is Ulim a voidspren on Roshar? And this is what Nale kind of thinks out loud when he realizes this. So Gavilar's plan is working. The fool, he will destroy us all. Nale sneered, a sudden and unexpected burst of emotion. That foolish idiot of a man. He lures us with promises, then breaks them by seeking that which I told him was forbidden. Yes, I heard it tonight. The proof I need. I know. Whatever Nale was working out with Gavilar that night, he's like, no. Or whatever they were working out over time, he's like, this isn't going to fly. He didn't expect that Gavilar was going to start bringing these sort of creatures to Roshar, it seems. So at that point, Nale says, okay, I've got enough evidence to know that Gavilar needs to go. What he does is he basically gives Venli all the information she needs to have Gavilar killed. This is when Nale tells Venli about Szeth. He says there's a slave outside, you can purchase him, he is going to be able to kill Gavilar. He pretty much says, Venli, he's going to betray the Parshendi, take this chance you can to kill him. I can't personally kill him. Nale has, lots of issues with the law. He wants to do it properly. So he can't do it himself, but he allows Venli all the information she needs to do it. Her and Ulim basically agree, this is what we're going to do. It doesn't play out exactly like that, but keep that in mind because we'll need that information for who we're going to talk about next. And that is Eshonai. Later in the evening, Eshonai arrives with the 5 who are like the elders of the Parshendi to the feast. We know Eshonai's got quite different ambitions than Venli. She just wants peace with the Alethi, and she's basically just taking in all that the humans have to offer, and she's quite amazed by it. One character that I want you to take note of that's with her is Clade, and Clade has noticed outside that there are not only Parshman slaves, but there are, he says Alethi, but it's referring to Szeth because they can't really tell the difference between Alethi and Shin people. It's referring to Szeth, so he sees that there is human slaves as well. Keep that in mind. As Eshonai is being super inquisitive and finding her way around the palace, she finds Gavilar. She pops her head in and sees him talking to a few mysterious figures. The people that 100% we know he's talking to are Nale, the herald I was just telling you about. He's talking to Kalak, another herald as well, and he's talking to Taravangian. These females in the room, I'm not sure who they are, but they don't seem as important to the scene yet. These people leave and it's just Gavilar and Eshonai. He talks to Eshonai in a very friendly manner, and she kind of gets distracted by the map that he has on his table. She is impressed by the beauty of it, the detail and the size of it, and she asks Gavilar to show her where the Shattered Plains are. He shows her where the Shattered Plains are, and she realizes it's like the size of her fingernail, and she kind of has an existential crisis about how large the world is, how much the Parshendi don't know, and just how overwhelming it is for her. Now Gavilar starts kind of ranting. Humans used to be so much more powerful. The Parshmen used to be vibrant. They used to have all these different types of forms, and he's alluding to all the forms that we later find out in the series. And he's also alluding to the radiance on the human side. He's basically saying the way the world is now is too stagnant and he wants to find change. Now this is where Eshonai starts to see one of the mysterious spheres that Gavilar has. Now he has some void light spheres and he has some anti-void light spheres that we find out. That's what they are later in Rhythm of War. Regardless, she sees this as a very dangerous option. She knows that he wants to bring her old gods back and she knows how bad that can be. And she recognizes the light as Odium's light, so she panics and runs out of the room. It cuts forward to the aftermath, but we start to figure out what happened in between there. This is a very interesting line from Eshonai's chapter. Hear this out. Clade's slave was an assassin. Clade claimed that a voice speaking to the rhythms had led him to the man, who had confessed his skills when pressed. Venli had apparently been with Clade, though Eshonai hadn't seen her sister since earlier in the day. Okay, so if you've been following along, you'll know that this voice that led Clade to Szeth was Ulim, Venli's voidspren. So from the information Venli got from Nale while she was talking with him and Ulim, they have led Clade to hire Szeth and eventually kill Gavilar. Now the reason that Clade went to go and get Szeth to kill Gavilar was not because of Venli, but it was because of Eshonai. Eshonai talked to the 5 and she told them that Gavilar was going to bring the old gods back, he was going to do all this horrible stuff, so they knew they had to take him out, though they took no pleasure in it. We later find out Venli is annoyed by this. Even though she's happy that Gavilar was killed, she's annoyed that it wasn't for her reasoning but for Eshonai's instead. So that leads us up to the date with the Parshendi perspective of that night with Venli and Eshonai. Now let's talk about what some of the humans were doing that evening. The next perspective I want to look at is Jasnah, and in Words of Radiance, the prologue is from her perspective, and we all know that a lot happened with Jasnah this evening, so let's talk about that. So as Jasnah is walking through the palace, she runs into her father, Gavilar, and they have, a bit of a tense conversation because Gavilar wants her to marry Amaram. Jasnah, being the inquisitive genius she is, kind of picks up that Gavilar's having a lot of hush-hush conversations, and she kind of wants to know what he's up to. She basically just says like, Dad, what are you doing tonight? Why are you in the shadows talking with all these people? And Gavilar turns back and really gives Jasnah a long stare. And he's incredibly paranoid, and especially paranoid of Jasnah, it seems, because he knows how damn good Jasnah is, and he's probably wondering, is she somewhat aware of what I'm up to? She isn't, and he just kind of moves on. Jasnah just thinks to herself, I'll have to follow this up later, and keeps making her way. Now, Jasnah is making her way to an assassin she has hired, but she gets interrupted by her shadow. She starts noticing that her shadow is pointing towards the light in the wrong direction. Sadeas actually walks past and walks through the shadow and doesn't even notice. Jasnah is like, oh my god, one of my episodes is going to start happening again, and out of her shadow come Inkspren. She doesn't know exactly what they are at the time, but it's Inkspren. Then she's suddenly transported to Shadesmar. It seems like it's the first time she's been there fully, even though she has the scholarly understanding to know, like, yes, I am in Shadesmar, and this is what I have to do. She slowly starts reconstructing the palace once she understands what the beads represent, and starts building everything up back to how it should be. She can see the Inkspren figures watching her. Now, I believe this is Ivory, her now bonded Spren, just seeing what she can do for the first time. There are a few other Inkspren behind Ivory who are kind of hush-hush whispering to each other. It seems like this is almost a test to see if Jasnah has the abilities to be an Elsecaller. Jasnah kind of activates, kind of rebuilds one of the statues in the palace, one of Talon, and it kind of holds a sword, and they're all quite impressed, and she's brought back to the palace in the physical realm. She noticed all the gems around her have been drained of Stormlight, so she has been, surge binding without even realizing. She's very rattled, but she starts realizing she has to make her way to Lys, and Lys is the assassin she has hired this evening. The reason she hired Lys was to watch over Aesudan, and Aesudan is Elhakar's wife. Jasnah seems to be extremely suspicious of Aesudan, but it's not exactly explained why. We know how bad things go for her in Oathbringer, so it seems like Jasnah had an inkling that she wasn't to be trusted completely. Now, her plan was to get one of Aesudan's maids fired and install Lys as a kind of watchful eye, just reporting to Jasnah. Now, Lys is known as the Weeper, and that's because she gouges out the eyes of her victims. The reason she does this is because she has a shard blade. Now, when you kill someone with a shard blade, their eyes melt away, but it seems like there's some remnants. So she takes all of that out so people don't even know she has a shard blade. It's extremely suspicious as to why Lys has a shard blade, but from what I can tell, we don't have any confirmation of if she's something more integral to the story. Jasnah basically just checks in with Lys, says, I'm going to install you, don't kill her yet, and if someone puts a threat on me or my family, tell me first and I'll up the price. So that's what happens with Jasnah there. Jasnah then just starts hearing a commotion, so she leaves and starts walking down the hallway. That's when she passes Nale and Kalak. Now, Nale and Kalak are in a very intense conversation as they pass her. Now, it's clear with hindsight that Nale has told Kalak about what he has done to set in motion the murder of Gavilar. This is what she hears Kalak saying to Nale as they pass her. I don't like this. What we've done was wrong. That creature carried my lord's own blade. We shouldn't have let him keep it. This is referring to Szeth. Now, when he says he carries my lord's own blade, that's referring to the blade that Szeth has. And the blade that Szeth has belongs to Jezrien. And Jezrien is basically seen as the king or leader of the heralds. So Kalak is very offended that Szeth is using his friend / leader's blade. So with all of that information, we know that Nale has said, hey, I've told the Parshendi that they need to kill Gavilar. I've sent them to the assassin in white. Obviously, Jasnah doesn't know who these guys are. There's too much going on, and she basically thinks, I'll have to research them later. And then she eventually finds the aftermath of what has happened, and she sees Gavilar's last moments as he plummets from the balcony and gets killed by Szeth. Now, this is where the Parshendi I told you to remember Clade rocks up with the other 5, or a few of them anyway, and talks to Jasnah. He's basically like, yep, we did it, we killed Gavilar. And she's like, why would you do this? And they don't say anything. They just like, Gavilar had some very dangerous things in motion and we have to do it. So Clade, the Parshendi who hired Szeth in the first place, admits it to Jasnah, and they are all hanged and killed later. Okay, now let's jump to Navani. Now, we got so much information from Navani in her prologue chapter in Rhythm of War. What was she up to? Let's talk about it. So the chapter starts off with Navani being very resentful that she's kind of organizing all the little bits and pieces that are going on to make this feast possible. She's sorting out a bunch of things, talks to a few scholars, and sees a very mysterious figure putting on too many rings who I think has to do with Axindweth, but that is not the most interesting part of what was happening that night. I want to jump to when Navani runs into Gavilar and his meeting in her study. She starts hearing his conversation between Nale and Kalak. This is what she overhears. Being able to bring them back and forth from Braze doesn't mean anything, one said. It's too close to be a relevant distance. It was impossible only a few short years ago, said a deep, powerful voice. Gavilar. This is proof. The connection is not severed, and the box allows for travel. Not yet as far as you'd like, but we must start the journey somewhere. So, a lot to unpack here. So Navani spots these anti-voidlight and voidlight spheres on the table, and it seems like this might be what Gavilar is talking about. He has been able to bring these back from Braze. Now, if you need a quick refresher on what Braze is and what the heck he's talking about, Braze is a different planet in the Rosharian solar system, and Braze is where the heralds go to get tortured by the fused, and all of that for thousands of years, keeping the Oath Pact intact. Now, it seems that Gavilar has been there before, and we get confirmation from this from another chapter in Rhythm of War where Mraize is talking to Shallan. He's trying to get Shallan to kind of query what Gavilar was up to, and this is what he says in response to her as to what he wanted. Immortality in part. He thought he could become like the heralds. In his quest, he discovered a secret. He had Voidlight before the Everstorm. He carried it from Braze, the place you call Damnation. He was testing the movement of light between worlds, and one close to him might have answers. So it seems like Mraize and the Ghostbloods totally knew what Gavilar was up to, and understood that he had been to Braze and had transported these spheres back. Now, it's uncertain if Gavilar actually went there or found a portal to there. It's unclear exactly if he was the person who transported it or had someone else do it. But he is definitely aware of how everything works with the heralds and the different planets, at least within the Rosharian kind of solar system. And we know that Gavilar knew the Ghostbloods pretty well, and we'll talk about that a little bit later in the video. Gavilar basically wraps up the conversation with the guys and says, look, I'm going to meet with Amaram later, and I'll talk to you then. Nale, being a boss that he is basically like, no, I doubt we shall, because Nale has already decided at this point that he's already put in motion what's going to get Gavilar killed. So this conversation is taking place after he's spoken to Venli. As they're leaving, Kalak starts panicking, and he's like, I don't like this, there's more to figure out, blah 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 blah. He's very, very panicked. Now, to touch on Kalak here, it seems that Kalak is trying to get off-world, and we meet Kalak later in Rhythm of War, and we see him that he's in lasting integrity, like the Honest Friends hub. And it seems through his conversations with Shallan and what we've gotten here in the prologues that he wants to get off-world. He wants to get into the cosmos somewhere else for whatever reason. Anyway, this is where Gavilar and Navani start fighting intensely, and we get an interesting line from Gavilar where they're kind of insulting each other back and forth. Gavilar says to Navani, you study light, but you are its opposite, a thing that destroys light. Navani actually thinks back to this moment when she's trying to create that anti-void light sphere. She thinks back to this because it gives her the revelation she needs to actually create it. Whether it was Gavilar just spitting out an insult or actually knowing how these spheres are made is unclear. It seems like it might be though, because this is the exact example of how it's kind of created. So it seems like not only did Gavilar have possession of these spheres, he may have had clues as to how they are made. Okay, now let's jump back to the very first chapter where it all started. Szeth, where he is sent to kill Gavilar. Now, going back after knowing all of this, the amount of information in Szeth's chapter is astounding, and it shows how much Sanderson has planned this whole thing in advance. Let's look into it. So as Szeth is making his way through the palace, he notices drunk Dalinar, and I will tell you that everybody sees that Dalinar is drunk during the scene. Dalinar, at this point in his life was very different, and he was drinking to basically forget this night. One interesting thing that I can't quite piece together how it all fits into the grand scheme of things, Szeth notices that Nale and Kalak were actually talking to Elhokar. Now, it's unlikely that Elhokar knew that these two guys were heralds. Szeth doesn't even have an inkling that they're heralds either. But why were they talking to Elhokar? That's an unclear thing that has not been touched on as far as I can tell. Now, it's mentioned in passing that Shalash is also here this night. Shalash is known for destroying depictions of herself. Szeth sees a statue of her destroyed. Kalak actually tells Gavilar that Shalash is here. She's talked about the entire night. But there is one more herald at this party that you might have missed. And this herald is the drunk that Szeth passes as he's walking outside to the beggar's feast. Szeth sees this drunk, and this drunk is giggling to himself, and he goes to Szeth, "Have you seen me?" And Szeth is like, what was this guy talking about? And then he starts walking towards these statues of heralds. This drunk is actually Jezrien, the herald whose blade Szeth is currently carrying. Now when he's saying, "Have you seen me?" he's talking about the statues right next to him. That's what he's talking about. And, you could be like, "Christian, you're being totally anecdotal here," but no, this is confirmed because if you go to Oathbringer, in Dalinar's flashbacks, in his drunken days, he drinks with this very same homeless guy, who is Jezrien. And Jezrien, in those chapters too, is saying to Dalinar, "Have you seen me? Have you seen me?" And he's giggling to himself. And then he talks about being tortured for thousands of years. Like, he basically spills out that yes, it basically gives you all the information to know this is Jezrien. Anyway, that's just almost like an Easter egg. It seems like Jezrien didn't really have much of a part to play in the events of the evening, but it's very interesting to see that he was there that night. And now, Szeth starts his rampage, killing everyone. We see that Sadeas was a decoy, and anyway, he eventually finds Gavilar, and they have their final standoff. But what the most interesting thing is here with Szeth is the conversation that he has with Gavilar. His dying words say so much. Now, this is what Gavilar says to Szeth as he is dying. The king coughed. "You can tell Thydekar that he's too late." If you haven't noticed already, we found out that Thydekar is the leader of the Ghostbloods. If you have read other Sanderson novels, you now know who Thydekar is. Just the implications that Gavilar knew him by name at this point in the story is mind-blowing. Szeth basically says, "I don't know who you're talking about, they didn't send me." Gavilar then replies, "Then who? Rastares? Sadeas? I never thought." Rastares is Kalak's kind of alias, so we know that Kalak is in lasting integrity under the name of Rastares. Now, he probably suspects Kalak because Kalak just wants to hurry this process up. He wants to get off-world. Whatever Gavilar is trying to achieve is taking too long, and he's very nervous. So that's probably why Gavilar started to suspect him. And then when he says Sadeas, I suppose he knows that Sadeas is like the scheming type, but didn't really suspect him fully. Gavilar's just like, who was this? Szeth tells him it was the Parshendi. And Gavilar has no idea why it would be the Parshendi, but he tells Szeth that he needs to tell Dalinar to find the most important words a man can say. Now, this is obviously a reference to reforming the Knights Radiant, it seems, and there's an interesting quote from Taravangian actually in Words of Radiance that touches on maybe what Gavilar was talking about here. Taravangian confirms in this chapter that he was there that night, and he's probably the bearded figure that Eshonai sees talking to Gavilar. This is what he said. "Visions Gavilar had confided in him 6 years ago. The night of the Alethi king's death, Gavilar had seen visions of the Almighty, who was now also dead, and of a coming storm. Unite them." This is confirmation that Gavilar was actually getting the visions that Dalinar gets in the Way of Kings previous to that. What that means, I'm a bit unsure. What Gavilar was a part of, it seems like we're so close to fully understanding. But let's speculate a little bit. So what we do know is that Gavilar was transporting Voidspren or Void Spheres and anti-Void Light Spheres away from Braze. What was his plan? Well, we know that he was in contact with the Ghostbloods. We're not sure they were all working together, though it does seem like they may be. It seems like Gavilar was trying to become immortal like the Heralds. Was he trying to create a new Oath Pact? Was he trying to create a new desolation on Roshar to kickstart the Radiance and start a massive war? Now, if he had anti-Void Light Spheres, it means he would have the technology to kill potentially Odium, but definitely all of the fused. They would not be immortal anymore, and they would have the means to kill them. Now that's probably why he says to Szeth, make sure the Parshendi do not get this sphere that I'm giving you right now. But it's still unclear exactly what Gavilar wanted from all of this. Now, I hope that all made sense, and I hope that gave you a lot to think about, and I want you guys to theorize in the comments, what was Gavilar's plan here? What was he up to? And if there are any other details that I missed, little tidbits, little Easter eggs in this feast scene, please leave them down below. There is so much to examine here, and I can't wait until book 5, where it seems like we'll get the final piece that puts this all together and tells us what exactly was happening that night and what exactly was Gavilar's overall plan. If you're still here at this point in the video, thank you so much for watching and sticking around. I have plenty more Stormlight content on my channel. If you would like to see more, please subscribe and please say hi in the comments. I love the discussion that this series can bring. I hope you all have a fantastic holiday, and I will see you all in my next video. Stormlight is amazing.